Hopefully they're all listening in. I can't
Good.
check. I'm sure
Right.
there's people. Okay, I'm just going to assume that everything's fine. Okay. Um,
I think we've got a
okay.
message from Drew, haven't we there? Something's flashed up. Oh, it's gone again now.
Okay, Drew says all loud and clear. Okay, excellent. Okay, cool. Well, we're going to begin. Thank you everyone for bearing with me whilst we sorted these issues. I'm very delighted to be able to welcome poet artist Paula Clare, who is joining us this afternoon for the second part of our Between Word and Image celebration of 60 years of concrete poetry in Cambridge. I have some quick, well, actually, no, I had some notes, but I think we might just get straight into it so that we don't lose any more time. So, did you want to say any words before we start, Paula?
Uh, well, just we've had a few hiccups, but I'm here now. And what I suggest we do, we'll do our 55 minutes as we said we would, and then we'll have a shorter time to chat because I do want to start my nature poetry work at 4 o'clock.
Sounds good.
Is that
Wonderful.
okay?
Okay, perfect. So we'll start then. So my slides are going to work. That's the next thing. Okay, so should we start
Oh,
with
lovely. So yes, you put up the PowerPoint stuff that you did for me. Well,
Mhm.
anyhow, welcome everybody. I'm not very good on tech at my age, and we rehearsed all this perfectly the other day. It went swimmingly, but today some little bits of problems. Anyhow, here I am in Oxford, and that image that you see at the moment is just over there on that window. That's the photograph I took of this poem Space. I want to talk to you about this one because I did it in 1970 and it's called a hand poem. And it has its other format as a poem object. Now, it was done specifically to celebrate the opening of the community college, which is again just over there. I'm in central Oxford. The mill stream that comes down from Port Meadow to Castle Mill, and then meets the Thames just over there. And then, if you can visualize where I am, the Thames is flowing very fast and high today, but we have actually stopped any flooding in the main roads. But that's over there. So you know where I am. And hello, Cambridge. I'm so pleased to be asked to speak in the Department of English. That's
Mhm.
very unusual for my subject because I usually do my work in an art department or a drama department or a music department. And many English faculties, they want to stay on linear poetry, poetry that has syntax and flows in a way that everybody expects poetry to do. But today we're trying to make people familiar with the kind of work that has got a rather unattractive name in English, concrete poetry. People then look at sort of brutalist buildings and they think, oh, what on earth is that? But I love it in French. La poésie concrète. I think that sounds really sexy. Perhaps we should always use the French term. Now, space, um, I was so interested in working on space in 1970 because it was all in the news. It's in the news again, isn't it? But in those days, people were still getting used to the idea that human beings could get off this planet and go to another one. And I remember standing with my father in the garden in Northampton, where I was born. I think it was 1957, and it was the VAC from where I was studying, University College London. But I went home and we stood in the garden, and my father pointed up and said, "Look, look, that's Sputnik." Well, that's the first time that human beings have put some kind of whizzing object round our planet. Well, Sputnik is not an English word, it's Russian. And then, of course, they were determined to get ahead and they put a lunar lander on the moon. I think that was 1960, 61, but it's all on the internet. You can find all about it. Well, that panicked the Americans. They thought, we can't allow this because those who control the bodies beyond our planet are going to be boss, and we're going to be subjected to people we don't want to be subjected to. So that's when the space race began. And of course, then the lunar landing by Americans was 1969. And everybody was riveted by this idea of where are we as human beings going round the universe. And that was the trigger for this whole interest in space, my focus on the word space. I had a good reason actually to create the poem objects and the hand poems, because we were celebrating the fact that our new community college had got a brand new building just over the road here. And we had a little art exhibition in the common room. The common room was again facing the mill stream, but on the other bank from where I'm sitting now. And so the poem objects were on view in the college, and here we're seeing some of them. And I cannot remember who made these lovely wooden boxes for me, but you can see that the word space is in this object very visible, and we're challenged to get close to the object. The one actually on the right hand side on the screen, you actually push round, so the words space go round and round. So I think this is a lovely one. Oh, you did this lovely video, India. So you've got the word space there, but CE, and then there's a blank, an SP, and a blank. So we're playing all the time with that word space, and the A is missing on that particular one. On the left-hand side, we've got some of the text of the words. There they are: space, void, dark, vast. Concrete poetry concentrates on just a few words. That is in order for us to give our total attention to it. And it's the idea that less is more. When we're using language in a general way, we're asking it to tell us information. And so there's thousands of words that often go through our heads during a day if we're, say, reading a novel. But concrete poetry has a different aim. It says, look at language itself. Look at the form of the letters of our particular way of communicating. We mustn't forget, of course, concrete poets are interested in all languages from all over the world. And when we think of the different forms, Japanese, for example, and Arabic, and all these different ways of writing, concrete poets want to understand how language has developed all over the world in all cultures, how it looks, and of course, how it sounds. If we've been to a foreign country and we don't know the language, we just hear it almost like music. It just has wonderful emphasis, wonderful drama to it. We can hear all the emotion, but we don't actually know the semantics. So I then developed this poem, and I want to just tell you the two verses: space, void, dark, vast. Those four words are what I consider the first verse. And I'd like everybody just to maybe in that room of yours, say the word space. Take a nice deep breath and let it out. Space.
Space. Space.
Space. Jolly good. That's lovely. You know, I used to perform this in schools. I did a lot of work in schools for about 25 years. And I used to say, it was very often National Poetry Day. And I'd say, well, look, everybody's got to meet in the big school hall. And then, well, sometimes we warned people and sometimes we didn't. Then with a group of the young ones would be saying space, vast, you know, all these different words and improvising. And then others would run round the corridors, also calling out space. And then if people knew we were going to do it, those in the classrooms would then start shouting. And oh, it was a lovely, lovely, great big joint sound poem. This poem has been one of my more successful ones. So the second verse, though, it starts from the last two letters of the first verse. So space, void, dark, vast. So it ends deliberately. I've looked very carefully at those words. St. Well, space in some ways appears to be empty. You know, when you're out and you look up at a very, very dark sky, it's really, really frightening. But if it's a clear sky, you see all these twinkling lights. So the second verse describes what we see in space sitting here, you know, without telescopes, but just looking up in the sky if we haven't got light pollution. And so it says star, start, only one more letter added, startle, because they are astonishing. You look up, you think, what does it all mean? And then I ended with a very surprising word. You know, poets don't necessarily think what they're going to write. Words seem to come into your head when you've written three of them. So star, start, startle, stab. And it's got a very, very fierce sound at the end. And I was thinking of what the stars look like when it's very, very frosty. And they look quite different if it's a lovely summer mild night. When they're very frosty, they do look sharp, almost as if they're like little knives, and they're hitting us in quite a fierce way. So that's how I developed it. And then, having worked in schools and performed it first actually over the road at the community college, I used to perform it a lot in schools. And then I had a very big and wonderful opportunity. In the 1970s, I was teaching students from the Middle East. It got very popular for students to come to Oxford, and they would tell their relatives, I've studied in Oxford. Well, many of the relatives didn't really understand that maybe working in a language school wasn't the same as being in the university. But anyhow, Oxford was very, very popular. And as a freelance, I had to earn some money. And I taught English as a foreign language in Athens from 1964 to 8. And so I continued it here in Oxford. And one of my students was a very, very nice person. He was so hardworking and he wanted to become an accountant. And I asked him, I was chatting to him one day because he came from Tehran, and I said, oh, how interesting, Persia. Oh, I'm sure it's very beautiful. And I've always wanted to go to Persepolis. And he said he had a letter from his mother 3 weeks later, and she said, come to Tehran and then you can stay with another member of the family in Isfahan, and then you can go to Shiraz. And my student's brother taught at an American twinned university in Shiraz. So when I performed Space in Shiraz, I then spoke also, I had the words that he told me the Persian language is called Farsi. And so it had that version. And this one you're now seeing on the screen, having got the idea that it was what we call a multi-language collage, I then had a really marvelous opportunity to perform it again. And that was with Mirella Bentivoglio's exhibition, The Materialization of Language. There's Mirella on the bridge. Do you see someone in a red jacket? And we've forgotten to say that that photograph was taken by another very fine visual poet, Chima Tsunada from Japan. And she got us all together in Venice in 1978. You're going to hear a lot more about how Mirella is what I consider, with Bob Cobbing, a mentor of mine. But anyhow, there we are all on this bridge at the side of the exhibition hall where she had her big exhibition of 80 female visual poets widely scattered around the world. She was absolutely determined to show that women were doing work in concrete poetry, performance poetry, sound poetry, as much as their male counterparts that are, of course, got very well known, but only now are we all being discovered, as they say. So there we are, that canal at the side of our exhibition hall was called Rio della Fornace. And Fornace is a kiln. And I assume that somewhere along there from probably medieval times, they were cooking up maybe cooking utensils and plates and that sort of thing. So anyhow, oh, here we are. Yes, these are the lovely photographs that my husband took for me when we went to Venice for a week in 1997. And I've got a photograph of us standing with our back to the great big water channel, the Giudecca, that's behind us. And that's where the big ships can't go down now because they were damaging Venice. And we're looking east. And if you know Venice at all, right at the bottom of that canal, just to the right, is the famous Santa Maria della Salute church. So it had a long space, and my colleagues from that exhibition, we were walking up and down because there are little walkways each side of the canal and then these bridges, and we were chanting the word space in 9 languages. I wanted to do that because Venice was the center of the luxury trade in Europe, because it was officially the end of the Silk Road. And the Silk Road came right from China, where silk was made. They pioneered the making of silk, and it was a very luxurious fabric. And there were a lot of secrets about how they did it. And so I thought it suitable to perform this outdoors along this canal in 1978, and then these photographs were 1997, and then I did an artist book of this in 2002. So I think we'll say that we'll now move on to the next one I want to talk to you about, and this is Phosphor of 1986. Well, I was when I think about how many places I've been able to perform in, a bit more luck than judgment, but this was for the Houston Festival of 1986. And I've been having short residencies in the 80s at, let me see, Lubbock. It was the Texas Tech University in Lubbock, and that's half an hour flight from Dallas, west of Dallas. And I think people know about it because, is it Buddy? There's a pop singer. What's his name? Buddy Holly or someone? There used to be a statue of him in the town square. And it's the only reason, really, a lot of people know anything about Lubbock. But it's a very big university, really, really large. And the person I was invited by, Steve Paxton, he was running the electronic music studio there. you have to remember that was a pioneering time. And all the stuff that we take for granted now in using synthesizers and all this sort of modern stuff now, that really was pioneering work. For instance, if you sampled a piece of music, you couldn't do it for more than 2 minutes. And now, I mean, that's considered to be utterly ludicrous. You can sample things for as long as you like. Now, the title page of, again, this artist's book, Phosphor, is a Greek word. Because I'd been living in Athens for 4 years and teaching English, obviously I had actually got to learn a bit of basic Greek. And because I managed to speak a little in what was called Demotic, there were two kinds of Greeks, especially in those days. Demotic was the common language of the people. If you went shopping, you'd speak in Demotic. But if you were writing for the university, or if I am speaking to you now in this situation, in an academic situation, you would speak katharevusa, which means the clean tongue. And trying to speak Greek in the 1960s, some of my very educated Greek friends would say, we really don't know how to speak correctly, because now people are getting fed up with katharebusa, and we all want to speak the same language, Demotic. So I spoke a bit of Demotic and got very, very interested in Greek vocabulary. So phosphor is Greek. Phos is light, as we know from phosphorescent, and for means carrying. So it means light carrying or light bearing. But if you take the Latin, that's lucifer. So another light carrier, but traditionally Lucifer is the fallen angel. And Lucifer decided that he was bigger than God, bigger, he was going to be the boss. And so he decided that he wanted to rule the universe. This book, which is 28 sections long and was performed at the Houston Festival with my music colleagues from Texas Tech, it is what I call an illuminated manuscript. 28 pages, and you can see that's in silver ink, and there's a blue card and got more silver writing on it. And the whole idea was that it was to question whether we as human beings are enlightened people. Do we carry the light? Are we enlightened? Or are we stupid and ignorant? And on the left, you can see a big KAOS. And that's my way of writing the Greek word chaos. It's pronounced in Greek chaos. It's got a great guttural sound right at the back of the throat and then comes forward. I think only in Scottish with the word loch do we actually make a similar sort of sound, and the British Isles. So again, is chaos going to rule us? Or are we enlightened? So on the blue one, on the next page, that's all about flying into space among the stars. That's a very happy page. The black page is unhappy, and the blue one is optimistic. Now, this for me is a concrete poem. I feel it demonstrates to everybody exactly what a concrete poem is. It focuses on only one word, but I've separated the words to show the roots of what they mean. And at the top, there's a big black, I drew it with a big black flow pen, and the word DIS, it looks threatening. It's on a white page and the black glares out at us. And then the bottom word is aster, and that is the word star in Greek. It is a very ferocious piece, and it is in memory of a horrible disaster for astronauts, American astronauts, on the 28th of January 1986. 7 astronauts were killed when something went severely wrong with their space capsule. So when I went to Houston at this time, everybody was still haunted by it. The festival at the Houston Festival was partly run at NASA. And we were invited to go to NASA, and there were some people who were actually performing at NASA. So all this is very much connected with how we're dealing with space and what happens to human beings when they try to get to it. And I just like to just say that word. Dis is the negative, and aster is also the other word. So it's a star that's gone wrong. And so that is the true meaning of, or your destiny has gone wrong, if you think the star reflects some kind of astrological meaning. So it's disaster. It's very, very ferocious. And when we perform this, that is a very hard, because I was working with the musicians, they were all improvising as well. And that was a very ferocious, and then a horrible silence, because everyone in the audience was still mourning not only disaster of those poor people, but the Americans felt furious that they'd made fools of themselves. I mean, that's how they saw it, because it was always this battle: who owns space? Is Russia going to own space or not? So now here's the next one. Have we got any bubble blowing India?
Yes, we do. I'm handing them out now.
Oh, lovely. Oh, I wish I was with you. Oh gosh. Now, this, you see, this poem has to have different moods. When you're trying to ask people about what's the significance of trying to go into space, leaving our planet and going somewhere else, it's a very, very serious theme. And you can't be serious all the time, else people, well, they just get fed up with it. So I wanted people at the performance to have different experiences. We actually performed this in the music department of Houston University. And I handed out these little bubble blowing things. You see, my son was 8 at the time, and we were big on bubble blowing. And all the bubble blowing things in those days were small. They weren't these great big things that you can get now with enormous great bubbles. So when you think of blowing a bubble, it's circular and it's a globe. But how long does it last? And have we any idea how long our particular globe has lasted, or is it going to come to an end? This is what this particular poem asks. But in order for people not to get too worried about it all, just bubble blowing and blowing it all over the room and thoroughly enjoying how they're floating about. Are we doing bubbles?
We are. When you're ready, Paula.
Lovely. So the text is, I haven't got bubbles here because I'm in a rather confined space, but the word bubble and the title of this is Oh If. Well, it's rather grim. Oh, if we survive. But here's O, that's the O of the mouth. And the O of here's my bubble, here it is, backwards and forwards. And the text says, oh, if we survive, if pigs might fly. And we've got this lovely saying, haven't we? Something impossible that you never know might happen. And actually, when we were doing this, because I love working with people, actually, but getting older, I'm not able to get around very well. But I have, and I performed this at the Cheltenham Festival 1 year after we did it at the Houston Festival, at Cheltenham Festival of Literature. I found from some shop two little key rings with two little plastic pigs with wings on. So you'd be blowing your bubbles, and then suddenly the pigs would appear, and that would mean there's hope for us yet. So when all the bubbles float about, you have to think, what does it mean? Does it represent all these other bodies in the universe? And, astronomers make extraordinary claims about how trillion stars there are. And your mind boggles with it. It's very, very difficult to take all this in. Anyhow, this is the moment when we are trying to get to grips with whether the world is going to survive. And then I hope pigs can fly. So, have you done your bubble blowing now?
We have. Would you
Still
like to do? We can still do it. Would you like to do the text improvised, Paula?
You can see it does relax everybody. That these themes are very serious in this poem, but we don't want to be serious all the time. We've got to try and relax. And in some ways, we've become children, and children have hopefully a very lovely way of looking at the universe. And that's what worries me at the moment, because there's too much doom and gloom. And well, you'll hear in my second part that I do when I do the nature poetry that I'm very keen that everybody is far more hopeful than the bad news we keep getting. Okay, so shall we go on to the next one?
Yep.
Oh. I'm really enjoying doing this. How's our time, India? How are we getting on?
It's 2:50, Paula. So do you want to keep going for another 20 minutes and then we'll break?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, we'll shorten the chat in the middle and we'll just do whatever comes to mind with this one.
Should we read
Now,
this one?
this is one of my favorite pieces, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, and then I'm going to put on my silly hat. I was interested in this phrase, bird-brained. To start with, it's a big insult to birds. Birds fly all over the world, backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards, and they don't have maps. They haven't got sat navs. What have they got to do it? Scientists, of course, are very interested in how birds go from pole to pole, like the Arctic terns. And how do they know how to do it? Not only do some birds, swallows, for instance, fly off to where they're going to in their winter quarters in Africa, and they leave their little ones behind because they haven't yet learnt to fly that well. And then, because we're always chipping birds now, aren't we, to find out where they're going, we know that those little ones go after the parents 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, and they go to exactly the right place. This is one of the most fascinating things in nature, I think. So to start with, birds can't be all that daft, can they? They can do what we can't do. And they're flying about in the air. They symbolize in many poems the idea that they are creatures that are exploring space. They come down on the ground for various reasons, but of course swifts don't. Swifts are up there the whole time, except when they breed. And they're just flying around. They can explore space in a way that we can't. And then, of course, we develop aeroplanes to say, yes, we can get off the ground, and we can fly from here to there, but not like the birds. So I thought, how do I present this poem? And I did present it. And that other photograph is me at the Poetry Library, level 5, South Bank Centre. And it was when I did my 50th anniversary performance. And it should have been 2011, but they got a lot of people wanting to do work. So I actually did it October 2010. And as you can see, I'm in front of their bookstore. All of those things, they roll around and they get their books out. And I am wearing a silly hat. I thought, right, bird brain is applied usually to women because women, well, they like to say that because we're not so rational, because we believe in intuition, uh, we're not as rational as men. And so it's a scientific group say everything must be judged in a rational manner, and use your brain and think about it. This poem is saying that creatures, they rely on instinct and they simply go. And in order to perform this poem, I have to wear a silly hat. And I'm really going to enjoy this because I'm going to put my silly hat on now. Right. Here it is. I don't know what you can see.
Looks beautiful, Paula.
Can you see it?
Yes,
Right.
it looks great.
I'm going to put it on now. And all this is veiling, all this stuff that I'm taking off the hat, because you can't have it all ready in one go. And the whole point of it, anyhow, is that you don it slowly. So this is what's known as a fascinator, isn't it? Now, can you see my fascinator?
Yes.
Good. So that's plonked on my head like that. And then when I perform this poem, I put all this veiling all over. And I think a veil is very, very fascinating. I think wearing a hat with a veil is most mysterious. And I've completely changed my personality when I'm wearing this. And so it's very exotic, this, and you wind it all over. It's never looks the same, of course. It's always different. And then what really should happen is that I stick all these bits of veil up the top with many bird feathers. I think you've got photographs of me, haven't you, India?
I couldn't get permission from Charles Omani, so I don't have them here, unfortunately,
Oh,
but they
I
are
see. So,
online.
oh
Yeah.
well, I see. Well, that's in my artist book. Um, the photographs of me wearing this hat are found in a very extraordinary place, all stuck with feathers all around the top. It's in a magazine, an Italian fashion magazine called Amica. Amica. And that was published in, I think it was not quite sure, July 2009. Yes, it must have been, because Charles Omani was commissioned to take photographs of the contenders for, no, it must have been 2010, maybe. Anyhow, you can look it all up on the internet. He was commissioned to take photographs of all the people, all the poets who had put themselves forward to become Oxford Professor of Poetry. It's a position that changes every 5 years, and people can put themselves forward. Well, when we did in 2010, there were there were 12 of us, and we were really a motley crew. And I think the university was very fed up that so many different people, of course, they wanted it to be very dignified and very serious. Well, one of the people who put in was Michael Horowitz. And in my opinion, he should have got that post. Michael was an amazing person. You can look his name up on the internet. He, as a young man, pioneered poetry, extending poetry to everybody. And he took part in those very famous Albert Hall performances in the 60s that made Ginsberg. Well, I mean, Ginsberg was famous anyhow, but they filled the Albert Hall to listen to performance poetry. And he had a great range of people that were performing. And then he created an anthology called Children of Albion. I think Penguin brought that out in 1969, as I remember. So that, of course, is a quote from Blake. Well, he really did a huge amount of pioneering, and I only met him, though we were all quite elderly at the time. I met him when he put in for the Oxford Professor of Poetry position. And he inaugurated a performance that several of us did over a cinema in Walton Street. And actually, that is online. That has a very good video of it. But he was so excited by poetry, and he believed that poetry should be experienced and enjoyed by absolutely everybody. It's not an esoteric thing. It ought to be widely appreciated. And all his life, he spent his time trying to get poetry thoroughly well known. And when they voted for the poets, I mean, I never thought I'd get any position, because all I wanted was to get our kind of work known. But quite frankly, everybody could see that Geoffrey Hill was going to get it, and I felt so cross about this. I actually resigned from being a candidate, and then I got on that morning programme and was interviewed by that chap I always called the Cornish leprechaun. I can't remember his name, but he interviewed me, and I ranted on about how I felt Oxford Poetry professorship wasn't really, well, I don't actually want to say anything naughty about this, but let's say Geoffrey Hill got it, and the second person who had got most votes was Horowitz. But it was a great pity that he didn't get it completely. So anyhow, if I just, yes.
I was just going to ask, did you want to read some of Bird Brained?
I'm going to read a little of it now. I think we've got time, haven't we?
Yes, we have time. I just wanted to check. Yep.
Yes, righto. Well, I'm going to pick it up now, and here is my artist book version. Here it is. And I don't know how good the light is in here.
It's good. We can see you.
The light is fading a bit now. Well, so I open it by saying, I wish, I said, I were bird-brained, eyeing myself in the mirror, caged in veils of this silly hat, perched on my head, flourishing feathers I have found on the ground. I stare at myself in the mirror and sigh. And then there's a photograph of me taken by Charles Omani, who was commissioned to take photographs of all of us. And he only said 7 poets would agree to be photographed. On his website, if you visit Charles Omani, in portraits, you'll find a very powerful one. He wasn't interested in flattering us. A wonderful one of Michael Horowitz. And then next is me in this hat. And it's one that he then used to put into the Amica magazine. And he said to me, why aren't other people prepared to let me photograph them? You say Geoffrey Hill is bound to get it because he's an Oxford person and written a great deal of very good poetry. Why do you say he isn't willing? And I said, oh no. He probably thinks it's rather frivolous to have his photograph in a fashion magazine. Oh no, that would be quite beneath him. And he said, well, I can't understand that really, because I have been commissioned to photograph the Queen's garden party in Buckingham Palace. And if I'm good enough for the Queen, why aren't I good enough for Geoffrey Hill? I said, I really don't know. You'll have to ask him. So it goes on. Bird brains don't know anything. Birds just let themselves go. Oh, so I deliberately put the G on one page and then the O on the next page to give the idea that the birds are flying from here to there. They are impulsive wherever they want. They go wherever they want, knowing nothing. The pull of need, attraction, swifts and swallows, storks and cranes, rascal cuckoos, tiny little willow warblers, precisely migrate forth, back and forth. And when you're with me, we do a back and forth movement. Maybe you like to imagine birds flying over you and you just sort of don't sit just solidly in your chair, but back and forth and back and forth. I love watching bird flight. It's so magical. And we've got illustrations of bird flight throughout this piece. Oh, yes, that's lovely. Thanks, India. You can see there are myriads and myriads of starlings on that right-hand side one. So that they remember nothing. Precisely. They are free as air. And they go on vast distances. Some of the geese, they fly over the Himalayas. And then the poem, it's typed on I bought it commercially. It's blue, it looks like blue sky with wispy clouds on it. And I typed it and onto that deliberately because I thought it was suitable for bird flight. And then it says they don't have to think about it. Pulled by all who went before, they, and then we've got a lovely picture of great big flights of birds in that V formation. They simply, and we've got a G on one page and then an O as you turn two pages, giving the idea that the birds have this instinctive and intuitive awareness of where they are, and they don't have to use their heads on it because they know where they're going. And so that is the meaning of that particular poem. Oh, I didn't finish telling you about the Omani. Oh gosh. So there's Michael Horowitz in portraits, and then there's me, and then there's another poet. I'm very sorry, I don't remember his name. And then guess what? Bill and Hillary Clinton. So you didn't know that concrete poets could get in with Bill and Hillary Clinton, did you? But certainly very odd company I've been in. I have a look at the kid's a very fine photographer. He really is. So I think now, we must get to Don't Look in the Mirror. How long have we been working for, India?
40 minutes, just over, nearly 50.
Oh, so we're fine. I mean, we're 5 past, aren't we? So really, then we're going to do quite a short chat, and then start the nature poetry promptly at 4.
Yes, that sounds good, Paula.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, now this last one I want to tell you about. I believe that concrete poetry is capable of dealing with very serious subjects. Some people, they think concrete poetry is a bit to do with playing with words and a very intellectual pursuit. And they don't really recognize it as something that is capable of dealing with extremely serious subjects. Now, Don't Look in the Mirror, that's the front page of my publication. I do little press, small publications. That is a photograph, a somewhat distorted photograph, taken of me by my collaborator, Peter Day. If you want to see more of the photographs he took of me on this project, you go to www.peteday.co.uk, I think. Anyhow, you'll find more of his photographs. He's been a professional photographer all his life and a lecturer. I think he was at Wolverhampton University. Well, I read a very shocking article in 1987 about a woman in Japan, and she was called one of the Hiroshima maidens because she had her face horribly disfigured by the atomic blast. And quite a lot of these young women, they actually did have some sort of help. Plastic surgeons in America felt guilty, very, very guilty, and they offered them free passage and to go to America, to stay in America, and to have their faces healed in some way or improved, let's say, in some way by plastic surgery. This article about this particular woman, she has now passed away, I've read. She, they said, I'm very sorry indeed. There's nothing we can do for you. You are so defaced, we can't do anything. And that's when she said this haunting sentence, I don't look in the mirror. I performed this first with my musician colleague at that time, Peter Stacey, a very fine composer and musician. And it was at that Cheltenham Literature Festival in 1987. And we were asked first to perform some poems, including this one, in Cheltenham Art Gallery. And later on, we went to perform Phosphor in the town hall. Well, Peter played a flute accompaniment to the text. There's a simple text of 11 pages, and then there's a change in mood, and then there's 3 more pages of text, and then there's 7 serious photographs of what Peter Day thought could express the horror of this situation. So the text had Peter Stacey playing his Baroque flute, but in a Japanese style. You can sure hear some on the internet. It's called shakuhachi style. And the Japanese playing that think that the breath is all part of playing the flute. In the Western tradition, musicians do what they call circular breathing if they're highly experienced, and you don't hear any huffing and puffing when flautists are playing, but that's different. So at the first performance at the Cheltenham Festival, Peter was playing it in a very extraordinary manner, but there's a lot of silence in the poem to relate to the few words that are on each page. So in a moment, I'm going to start reading this text from my page here. And when I actually did this with a colleague, Ginny Lavelle, in Oxford, we had a group called Centre the Circle. I think it was about 2009. And no, it wasn't. It was 1992. And we performed this in a very ceremonial way. Everybody stood in a circle while I read the text. And then at the end, I hand everybody a mirror. It's very ritualistic. I bow in the Japanese manner, and then I look in the mirror, and then I bow to the next person, hand the mirror, and everybody else looks in the mirror. There is this saying, your face is your fortune. Well, it does apply to men, of course, but very, very much to women. And women feel if their faces are not acceptable, then they just won't succeed in life. So this is what the poem is about. It's about identity. And that woman was denied her identity, and she lived a recluse. She never came out of her house and died alone. So I'll now start reading it. And then at the moment that you are going to look at 7 photographs that Peter Day took of me. Let me explain how he did them. At the time, he was an undergraduate and he was specializing in photography. And he took me to the photography studio. Oh, by the way, he'd invited me to speak about concrete poetry first because he was very interested in it. And then we went into the studio, and right at the end, he prepared a very small photography room where specialist work was done. And he had covered the wall in front of me in kitchen foil. So it was all silver. And then he put each side of my head a 2,000 watt lamp quite close to my head, here and here. And he said, Paula, please look into the foil, get very close to it. The heat of the lamps will make the foil shudder. And I'm going to take photographs of you to symbolize what happens when a woman's face is destroyed. And I think what he did is truly magnificent. And I really do feel we have got home to people the horror of that bomb, what that woman suffered, and how we hope that this sort of thing won't happen again. So at the end, when I stop reading the second part, then you will contemplate very quietly for about 20 seconds, maybe, each photograph, India. It has to be done in a very, very solemn way. If I'm with you, I turn the page in a very ritualistic way, and then the mirror appears. And it actually is quite an ordeal. You think, who am I? What am I going to see in the mirror? Because maybe you'll look at yourself in a way that you haven't seen before. So let us begin. The page, by the way, is A4, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 words, very small typing. I hadn't remembered that the second part is actually, it's done on Olivetti that's got daisy wheels. You could actually change your font using these different daisy wheels that you clicked in and out of your machine. That's all part of the history of the technology before computer graphics all came in. So I'm now going to start. I am a woman with no face. I am a woman with no face. Less. I am a woman with no face. Less. Shunned. I don't go out. Who am I with no face? A face is plastic, melts into a smile. A face is plastic. Melts. They gave the others plastic faces. Some even got married. It isn't true. All women are the same. in the dark. No one loves me face less dark. I don't look in the mirror. Don't look in the mirror. Don't look in the mirror. And then there's deliberately a black page ending it. It's black. Now, the second part of the poem changes mood. And I'm quoting exactly what was said to me by the son of Arthur Goodwin. Arthur Goodwin, actually, he held a series at his college. It was Exeter College of Art and Design, it was called in those days. It's now Plymouth University. And he worked with the University of Exeter, and they did word and image. So, you know, the word and image studies go back quite a long way. And he was so interested in our subject, and he actually got me my archive exhibition at the X Gallery that Exeter College of Art and Design ran. And then my colleagues came over and we performed sounding in Exeter Cathedral. So when we were in Exeter Cathedral with my American colleagues, the son of Arthur came up to me. He was, I don't know, about 9 or 10, very nice child. And he said, "Look, look," the boy said, pointing to the pillar near us. As we rehearsed in Exeter Cathedral, me and my friends from Texas, setting up the electronics for sounding. Look, look up at that statue. Do you see the lady? The lady with no face? The lady with the baby. You see, she has no face. Shot at by the soldiers in the Civil War. Cromwell's army used her for target practice. We come here with our school and they told us, look, she has no face. Do you think she can see us? And then that's the third section. There's a third section. There's a big black page, meaning the mood changes. And then just very, very brief typing on this page. You've got a great big white space, and then don't look in the mirror. And realize I haven't bothered with the apostrophe in don't. It's D-O-N-T all the time because I didn't want the language to look too fussy. And then on the second page, just 2 words. Don't look. And then in the last page of this second section, a great big white page and a white page over there, and it just says, don't. Well, you know what human beings are like. If somebody says don't to you, good many people, they just can't stand it. They think, oh, I must look. I must look. I've been told not to look, but I'm full of curiosity. What's next? So now we go into the very ceremonial and ritualistic looking at the pictures. So they're all of my face distorted in this foil wall with a terrific heat on it and taken brilliantly by Peter Day. So let's just see one at a time. First, we saw the first one, and then we look quietly, and it's black on one side of the page, and then that one. Oh, blow, I've turned it off.
You right, Paula?
Oh, here we are. Yes, some message came through. I shouldn't have done. Okay, now let's go to the next page. That that actually has been treated by Peter. He's put black ink on the actual original. He's given me some of the originals for my for my personal collection, but that one I think shows the horror of it, that someone is trying to protect their face and they can't. Yes, now we do the ritualistic hand mirror movement. If we're all together, I'm in a circle of you and I bow in a very ritualistic Japanese manner. And then I look in the mirror and then I bow to the next person and hand them the mirror. And we are all looking at our identity, having heard how one poor human being had such a dreadful experience of life. And I hope now she rests in peace. My hand is shaking when I did that. The poem is very effective. Then I bow and India is going to pass the mirror around. And the poem will end when the last person has looked into the mirror. If we were together, we would all bow simultaneously, but maybe we can't do that here.
I've just passed the mirror around, Paula, so everyone's having a look at their reflections.
Very good. So have we finished that yet?
It's still going around.
Lovely, lovely. Just let me know when it's finished.
No worries. I'm going to put some lights in. So the mirror's just going around, Paula. I don't know if you can see.
Oh, yes, I can. When everyone has finished, let's bow to each other. You tell me when we do.
I'm bowing now, Paula.
Right, so we all bow together.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Paula. Would you like a break now?
Yes, I would, yes. How long shall we break for? I don't need to break for more than about 5 minutes if you think we're running a bit late.
Well, it's 3:30, so
Very
we can take maybe 5 minutes break
5 minutes.
and then
Let's take 5 minutes, only I shall get cramp if I sit here any longer. I'm a bit subject to cramp.
no
So you'll
worries.
keep the whole thing running. I just leave it then on.
Yeah, that's fine.
And we're back in 5 minutes. So that's well, yes, it's just got it'll be almost just by 3:30, won't it?
Yep.
And then we shall
Sounds
have
good.
a chat for 20 minutes or so, or 25 minutes, and then we'll go on to the nature poetry strictly at 4 o'clock.
Yep, that sounds good, Paula.
Lovely then. Okay, so see you again soon.
See you in a moment. Whenever you're ready, Paula, we can start things up again.
Okay, lovely. I think I should like just to speak very briefly about my two mentors, Bob Cobbing and Mirella Bentivoglio, and then I'm really keen on speaking the rest of the time about the archive because it's so important.
Sounds good. We can do that.
Finish at about 5 to 4, have another brief break, and then the nature poetry.
I'll finish up with some more poetry. That sounds good. Okay, so why don't we start then, Paula, with, I mean, so collaboration is a massive part of your work. And
Yes.
you've spoken to me and you've written in other places about your major collaborations and your major collaborators, Bob Cobbing and Mirella Bentivoglio. And I'm just wondering if you might speak a little bit about your experiences collaborating with these two poets
Yes.
and artists, and what that experience of collaboration is like and why it's so important to your work.
Well, meeting Bob Cobbing was hugely important for me because he was 19 years my senior. I met him at a poetry conference run by the Poetry Society at the University of York in September 1969. I deliberately went to hear him because when I came back from Athens to settle in Oxford to help my parents retire there, I'm an only child and I felt they needed my support. I went to London and I thought, well, what's going on in really modern poetry? I was working in a non-linear style by late 1966, influenced by Gerard Manley Hopkins. And I went to Better Books, not realizing that Bob had actually been manager there for a while, just before I visited, and I found a key anthology. It's the Anthology of Concrete Poetry, produced by Hansjörg Meyer and Emmett Williams, 1967. And in that, you've got nearly all men, of course, concrete poets. And in there, I saw Bob Cobbing's work, and also there was a thing called the radio. No, what was it called? The third program. That's it, on the BBC. The very cultural program. It was the third program, and I heard Bob reading his ABC in sound on it. And I thought I just must meet him because I really feel that he'd understand what I'm doing now. And so at this conference, September 1969, I heard him, and everybody was absolutely staggered. He had an extraordinary voice, and he'd just come back from Stockholm, where he'd been recording experimental work with filking and radio. It's all on the net if you want to learn a lot more about it. And the poem that he performed at that time was called Mississippi, and he loved making all these sounds. He's done a very fine typewriter work of it, but with all the letters whirling about. And so Mississippi, pip, 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 Mississippi, pip, pip. And we could all go on ages with that because it's such fun. Now, I just must remind people that the idea that words can float about anywhere and letter forms can float about anywhere, we do have to say that Marinetti, in 1909, he founded the Futurist movement, and he had this sound bite, parole in libertà, meaning words in freedom. Stop keeping words. I mean, look what you've got, a conversation with Paula Clare. It's got a noun and then it's got my name, and you're going to read it as semantics. But he said, no, have letters all over the place. And of course, for years, he did very amazing work. What a lot of people don't know, that various colleagues of his also did a lot of work. And I refer you to a book by Professor, well, he's Emeritus Professor Bone, Bohn, Willard Bone, and that's The Aesthetics of Visual Poetry, 1914 to 1928. In fact, that was the book that Peter Day found. I don't quite know how he came across it, and that's why he invited me to talk about concrete poetry. Anyhow, Bob was really so involved in it all, abroad as well as here. And he had his own press called Writers Forum Press. And at that conference, I very shyly sat next to him at dinner, and he was very friendly with everybody and chattering away. And then I said to him, "Oh, I wonder if you'd like to look at my book." And I just self-published Mobile Poems Greece. And it was to be semi-improvised, the word semi-improvised. And I said, I've worked with some young actors and they don't seem to want to improvise. I do so wish I could find someone. Well, Bob looked at my work and he just did it. He did it straight off, as if he'd always known it. And it was just terrific to find somebody who actually understood what I was trying to do. And I'll never forget, just at the end of our conversation, someone of the staff in this dining hall gathered all the stuff together from all the tables. There were knives, forks, plates, everything. And they tried to take their trolley into the kitchen, but it was a swing door. And I'm afraid they misjudged it. And there was a terrific crash, and all that stuff went onto the floor. And Bob and I said, "Oh, what an archetypal sound! Oh, marvelous, marvelous." And so we interpreted sound in that very positive way, although we felt awfully sorry for this poor person who, I mean, a lot of it was all broken and everything. But that cemented my relationship with Bob. And he said, "Well, look, I'm going away again." I think he had to go back to Stockholm. But he said, "Come and see me after Christmas." And I went to his house in Randolph Avenue, the 27th of December, 1969. I'll remember it because, it changed my life forever. So I went in, got the train, of course, from Oxford to Paddington, and then caught one of the tube lines and walked along Randolph Avenue to his house. Well, he rented the ground floor and the basement. The basement was where he kept all his publications. Oh my gosh, stashed with stuff. And I went in and I said, "Oh, yes, I'm so glad you've invited me." He wasn't anyone for small talk. He didn't say, "Did you have a nice Christmas?" or anything like that. He said, "Right, now I've just done this. Let's give it a whirl." Straight off. So I managed to put my coat somewhere because there were books all over the floor, absolutely everywhere. But I managed to take my coat and hat off, and then gave me this thing, and off we went. And what I think was wonderful about Bob, there was no sexism. He always treated me as an equal, right from the very beginning. And that was hugely important to me because it wasn't a question of, "Oh, I'm patronizing you and you're a bit useful for me." No. And when he then invited me to that very important exhibition, Concrete Poetry, at the Stedelijk in November 70, the first performance we actually did together was at St. Martin's College of Art when it was still in the Charing Cross Road in May 70. And from then on, we worked quite regularly together. And in order to, when that exhibition, the Stedelijk exhibition, came to Britain, and it was presented in Oxford, Liverpool first, the Walker Art Gallery, then Oxford, Museum of Modern Art, and then it went to Belfast, but I'm afraid we didn't go to Belfast. But we had to do a disc, a vinyl disc for it, and so we recorded on that. That's quite a historic piece now. And he gave me this huge confidence, and he formed our group, Concrete Canticle. And at first it was a musician who played with us, Michael Chant, but then he was very much concerned with the scratch orchestra and said, "No, I want to concentrate on the music." And so he then invited Bill Griffiths, and we did our first performance there at the Berlin Festival in 1977. And then 1978 went to it was Toronto, and then New York in 1980. And we built up a whole tradition of working together, which lasted, I think the last thing I did with Bob was the Arf film in 1993 at a pub in Mornington Crescent, can't remember its name, but but it was marvelous. Bob gave me huge confidence, and we just gelled. So that was the importance of Bob. Oh, and he would just let out these incredible sounds. And his great saying was, own your voice. And I remember I've done a visual poem of that on my iPad, and we performed that quite amazingly by Zoom with Mark Matter and his students. He's at the Robert Schumann University in Dusseldorf, and at the time the COVID was on, and his students were all over Germany, all on Zoom. But we were all working together, and we did an improvisation. Oh, your voice, what? And you have all these different squawkings, all coming from all over Germany. It was a terrific experience, and you'll learn about that on my new website, paulaclairelinks.com. So that's Bob.
That sounds like that period of your life was really formative for you in terms of your practice today. But I want to kind of pick up on what you were saying about, Bob's attitude to women, because certainly it wasn't the case that was a kind of shared view, and women were often kind of, for want of a better word, kind of excluded from certain circles. And I guess this comes to Mirella, because she had a big network of women poets of which
Yes,
you were a part. And maybe you can talk about how important that network was for you and going to Venice and yeah.
Well, I never met Mirella until we actually did that Venice show. But I was in the catalogue of the question mark concrete poetry in what was called Open End. And I think I had 2 typewriter visuals in it in that exhibition. And Mirella was also open end, and she read the catalogue and then she wrote to me. Mirella was a great letter writer. I have well over 80 of her letters over the years, and towards the end she said to me, Paula, I am cave woman. I don't like computers and things. I'm always going to post you letters, which is rather lovely in a way, because you know, emails, they don't have the same personality as a letter. So she said, now look, I've looked at this catalogue, the Stedelijk catalogue, and she said there are 138 practitioners, 8 women. She said, is it true? Because I have quite a few people that I know round me in Rome. She lived in Rome. And she said, I just don't believe it. I'm going to research it. And she religiously researched it. And the first exhibition we did actually was in early 1972 at Centro Tool in Milan, and that was run by Ugo Carrega, who was very interested in experimental work. And she then, she was so proactive. She knew all the different galleries, and there were so many galleries in Italy anyhow. And so she had an exhibition gathering women together every year up to 1978 and onwards. But the real focus was 1978. She had actually got us into a posh gallery in Venice in 1977. It was called Il Canale. And I said, I want to perform, Mirella. Can't you get them to give me a bit of money to come over to Italy? And she said, where would you like to perform? I said, in a gondola, of course. I should love to have done that. But no, that didn't happen. We did the Rio de Fanaci, and then, of course, the big work, the Code Stones of Venice on the quay in the evening after I'd done the work in the afternoon. So Mirella, she actively got everybody together, and it was a marvelous. But of course, I mustn't say Mirella was a feminist in the sense that she didn't want anyone else to take part. Mirella was absolutely dedicated to concrete poetry, visual poetry. And twice my husband and I visited her flat in Rome. I've got a lot of beautiful photographs he took of us. And she had these objects and beautiful things everywhere. And then she'd say, I mean, luckily it was a fly drove, so we did have a car. She'd say, now look, Paula, I've got all these people to send stuff to me for your archive. In my archive, I have the people, the country that's most represented. I think I've got 53 exponents, and a lot of them women from Italy. Their tradition from Marinetti never really fizzled out. They think of it as something quite natural and normal in a way that we're still, as you know, very suspicious of the field.
Mm. So you have sort of actual collaborations that take place in your practice with the people that you perform with, but it sounds like your archive is also an act of collaboration with various other poets and other people involved in this movement. And maybe, you know, you could talk a little bit about your archive, how you've built it, how many, you know, practitioners
Yeah.
are represented in it. Yeah.
Well, as you know, when you last came to the house, the archive is now all over there. I mean, in quite a long room in my house. There's the Thames on one side and there's the city on the other side. And I felt we have to do justice to the archive. If it's all mixed up with the massive work that I've done that's on the ground floor, it's not going to be as clearly seen. And if anybody wants to adopt it, they can then look at all these shelves, count the boxes, and say, well, that's the amount of stuff that we've got to adopt. Well, of course, I never intended to have an archive. It's a big responsibility, but it
Mm.
started really with Bob. Bob, when he knew that we were going to perform, he was always handing out all his stuff. And he'd say, this is the one we're going to do, or that one, or let's have a go at this one. No, his favourite phrase was, let's give it a whirl. That was his key phrase. And he gave me all his early publications. They influenced me a lot because at that time, um, you know, his small press demonstrates various formats. Sometimes he would staple pages, sometimes he might sort of tape pages, sometimes he'd have little plastic spines. But at that very early time, I was beginning to work with him. A lot of his publications were in envelopes. They were manila foolscap envelopes. You know, that was the format at the time, like the quarto paper before A4 came in. And I have so many of these early works of Bob and also Bob's originals. I mean, you just hand them out. I'm very pleased one has got a nice big black inky thumbprint of Bob, which I think is better than a signature. So he was very important. Then, of course, Mirella gave me a lot. Oh, and I must say other people. Um, we were invited, Concrete Cantor were invited to Toronto in 1978. And we did a performance there. And we got to know such a lovely person, B.P. Nicol, Barry Nicol. And he ran the Coach House Press. And he gave me, I remember, he gave me 14 books of the Coach House Press in all kinds of varied formats for me to lug back in my, not my hand luggage. I had to go in a suitcase. They were heavy, but anyhow, thanks very much to B&P Nicol. I have a lot of Canadian stuff, and various Canadian poets then knew he'd given me stuff, and they would send me things, and I would send my small publications back to them. So it was part of what was then known mail art, MAIL. Now, other contributors to my archive that have really given me comprehensive work is Fernando Aguirre. and he's based in Portugal, just near, I think he's moved a little now, but he runs the Archive of Living Poetry just outside Lisbon. And he sent me all the stuff that he's done, and he's a fantastic performer. I saw him perform at it's a Bebiobi Festival in Berlin, and that was something like in 2004, five. I have the reference somewhere. So he then got me invited. No, it must have been early, because he got me invited to do what I think is a lovely performance that I had. And that was in Porto, in Portugal. And they were European Capital of Culture in 2001. And he got me that performance. And it started very late, about quarter to midnight. That performance started at the Lyric Theatre, and I did this sunflower poem, and the poem finished on that great bridge, that great metal bridge in the centre of Porto, and we cast 100 sunflowers into the river. And I've Fernando to thank for getting me that particular performance that I really think was one of my best. But again, he sent me a lot of things, and I've sent him my anthologies, and catalogues. So we've been in contact. My main contact now in Italy, now dear Morella has passed away, is Giovanni Fontana. And he is extremely active, not only as a superb poet, visually, I think his work is wonderful. He collages all bits from newspapers and photographs, and then he has an inimitable handwriting. Technically, he's actually an architect, but he does all this beautiful, beautiful work, and he's in touch with me all the time, telling me what's going on in Italy and sending me stuff. And then another very important person is Carl Kempton, and he's in California, and he is really proactive in working in the field. And I would heartily recommend to you an extraordinary, I think it's online book, talking about the history of visual poetry. I forget exactly its title, but if you put Carl Kempton in, you'll find it on the internet. What is so extraordinary about him is he doesn't see concrete poetry as a literary or an academic subject. He thinks that it belongs to a whole range of extraordinary work from ancient cultures, mystical cultures, where they have put down, say for in India, they draw their gods all in their script, as if drawing things in script gets you closer. And of course, the Jewish tradition also does the same thing. So he puts it in a really vast cultural setting and spiritual setting. And I think he's done us, I heartily recommend that for everybody to read.
Perfect. I'm just conscious of the time, Paula. It's almost 4, so maybe we wrap
Yes.
up our conversation now. Did you
Yes.
want to have it? Did you need another break, or did you want to keep going?
Are we going to be
No,
able
I
to-
think actually we can keep going, really, if everybody's happy.
Okay, one moment. I'm just answering a question. Sorry.
Are we going to be able to ask her a question?
Yes, actually, so I've got an audience member who would like to ask a question, Paula. Would you be open to? Did you want to ask a question?
Hi, Paula. Can you remember Do Dee Di Do?
Now, I can't hear very well now because obviously she's in a different position. Maybe you can repeat what she said.
So just coming up to the speaker, Paula.
Right.
Hi, can you remember Do Dee Di Do that you created?
I'm sorry, I still can't hear it. I can hear you very clearly, India, but I'm sorry, I can't hear the person who's
She's
asking
just
me the question.
asking, sorry, so she's just asking about a piece you created called Do Di Do.
Oh,
It was an ephemeral piece.
yes. I don't recall at the moment quite what that one is.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Paula, can you hear the question being asked now?
Not terribly. You have to remember, I do have tinnitus, and I can't, you know,
Okay.
I can hear very clearly when somebody is, I can hear you clearly as anything, but I'm sorry, I can't hear about that.
She might email you if that's okay. But we'll move on to the next section now, Paula, if
Yes,
that's okay with
righto.
you. Okay, so we'll move on to the last
Yes.
section. Thanks everyone for bearing with us, but we just have some more poetry, a
Oh,
little bit.
yeah. So we're now everybody, of course, is so over anxious really about nature and our environment. And I wanted to show you that I'm very interested in the movement of birds and well, that relates to bird brain, doesn't it? And I also wanted to show you that I was non-linear, basically non-linear, when I first started in 1961. So this is a very early poem, and it's got three possibilities. And of course, it's all improvised. And if we were together, we could improvise this. But I think at the moment it's a little difficult to do that. But if you feel like joining in, I will be reading it, but I won't be reading it exactly as it's written. Bob's tradition was that you should always feel very free to interpret things as you like. But if you actually look at the text, I've got signals under the words. And the single words, the ones with the single underline are verbs, and then the ones that have got two lines mean that there's several meanings in the word. Wheel off, for example, means to spin off, and also well, it's trying to get over to you the complex movements of birds as they fly in a great flock. The murmurations of starlings, for example, I think they fascinate everybody. So I'm going to do this one. You can see it's been influenced by Gerard Manley Hopkins. Of course, there's quite a lot of alliteration. Dazzles and glints of birds, speaking to the sun. Dagger air, cliff down sheer it. They move in breathing scape, working clay, pulsing on the wheel. They wheel off, air shrills and puckers. Dazzles and glints of birds, speaking to the sun. Dagger air cliff, down sheer it. They move in breathing scape, working clay, pulsing on the wheel, wheel off. Dazzles and glints of birds, speaking to the sun. Dagger air cliff cleave, down sheer it. Dagger air, cliff down sheer, cleave. They move in breathing scape, working clay, pulsing on the wheel, wheel off. I was making clay pots at the time at St John's Wood, and I was doing a lot of work. I was fascinated by making pots and how the clay pulses in your hands. So that metaphor has come from my making pottery. Right, so that's 1961, and now it's poetry laurels, and I'm just going to get some of mine that I've taken from my neighbour's bush. She knows I do this sort of thing. And so she says, oh, well, help yourself, Paula, whenever you want. I don't think she thinks it's rather odd thing to do, but on the other hand, she's happy that I do these. So these laurels were gathered yesterday from her bush. Now, this was a piece done in 1975. And this was at Bob's festival. He held an annual festival of sound poetry in the Poetry Society in Earl's Court Square in London. and it was a lovely space that you could work on. And he actually invited in that year some Canadian poets. I suppose that's when I did first meet B.P. Nichol, and also another poet, Sean O'Higgins. And he then wrote an article about this work in Open Letter, which was a magazine about experimental art published in Toronto. And he has a photograph of me performing these leaves. Now, as you know, I am very interested in patterns on stones, and Liz Laws from UCL has done a video with me about talking about improvising to marks on stones. I'm convinced that all alphabets, or whatever communication systems you like to call them, they have developed from our early lives in which we had to read everything very early on, and all Aboriginal peoples do now. They have to look down at the ground, see what's happening, look up at the sky, see what's happening, and all around them, all the creatures they have to live with and be careful of, all these signs are original language. So I got used to working on these leaves, and they are unique. Every leaf that is on that tree, that's a photograph of another one, another shrub, is unique. And sound poets have actually developed a technique of experimenting with what the human voice can do. And I was very, very lucky. I went with Bob in 1971, May 71, to Willemsbad by Hanau. We'd flown to Frankfurt, and then we took I think public transport there, and it was an extraordinary place there, and there was a big European sound poetry festival. So I heard live two great exponents, no, actually three. It was Henri Chopin, and he pioneered work with the tape recorder. And his favorite trick was to have a microphone and rub the microphone all over himself, over the skin, over the hair, over his jacket, and record it. And he said, everything is a sound poem. Then there was Bernard Heidsieck, and he also was astounding. He also recorded things, but he then spoke live on top of them. And his famous one is Autour de Vedas, and you're Autour de Vedas. And that means all the names of all the cities in this small town. I think it's in Liechtenstein. And then it goes round and round and gets bigger and bigger all around the world. But, oh my goodness, there's a lot about him on the internet. It was Francois Dufresne. When he arrived at the festival, he looks ever so proper. He got a suit on, and his wife looked very, very proper. She got a fur coat and a hat, and you think, oh, what on earth's he going to do? Well, he had pioneered vocal microparticles. And I was fascinated and delighted with what he was doing, because he interpreted marks as extraordinary sounds. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of work on how I would interpret, and how I did interpret in 1975, this sort of leaf. It'll just go on forever. I better stop.
Wonderful. Thanks,
Have a
Paula.
listen to him. There's so much on the internet. A big lot for him. So that's the laurel leaves, poetry laurels, I called it. Right, now we're going on to Luna Aria, Have we got the picture of the, yes. Um, because I did the poems about the universe starting very early with my interest in the sun and the moon, this is a particular visual poem object that my husband made for me. He's stained glass artist Paul Sankashani. His family, his grandparents came from Italy to London right at the beginning of the last no, about 1900. So this is glass applique. That means that you take a piece of ordinary glass, it has to be quite strong, of course, and then you have all your offcuts that you've made stained glass windows with. And he said you don't have to waste anything at all. If you've got a lot of offcuts, and of course, stained glass is very expensive, it's handmade and beautiful different colors. Each sheet is unique, and you can use all your offcuts, combining them to do something else. So I said, I want to do a poem called Moon Omen. And that meant, what relationship do we have to the moon? If we think well, obviously 1974, there have been a lot of considerable number of moon landings, and what do we want to do with this? I mean, is this pure science, or could it be very worrying? Could it be that people are going up there and pointing horrible, nasty weapons at us in order to be boss of the universe? So what is the omen to the moon for us? And those are all fragments, and you can see there's a big circular moon, and it's cut in what's called bubble glass, and then MEN all round it. You can clearly see the M, and if you actually see the panel, it was hanging up in this window again where the space poems were. It's beautiful colors all over it, but that photograph doesn't quite do it justice. But anyhow, that was on view at the Poetry Society in Earl's Court Square in 1974 when Bob had a festival. And so I feel that that's an early moon poem. Could we then have a look at the iPad ones, please? Right. Now, I love working on an iPad. I mean, it's a pleasure to do because you can get results pretty quickly. And I draw on the screen using one of their pens. And all these poems, as you see, are in black and white because I want the moon itself, that's the full moon that you saw in the stained glass panel. The full moon was what people love to look at, don't they? They say, "Oh, there's a special moon tonight. If there's not light pollution or if there's no clouds, go out and look at it." And you have pictures from all over the world showing moon poems. That one on the left, I did fairly recently, and it says, "I remember when the moon was pristine." And it's got swirls all round the moon as if it is a flower. And I had to do that 20 times before I was satisfied that that flows properly. If you look at it, it does actually swirl round in a beautiful flower pattern. And I do feel very sorry for the younger generation now, because you will never, ever see the pristine moon. I did when I was young, and that's why I feel very, very strongly that we as humans are not content to muck up the earth. We're now going on to the moon, and some people say, "Oh, I'm only looking for scientific interest." But even the Royal Society has got a film that I saw on my iPad the other day saying that the moon is invaluable as a source of diamonds and other minerals. And so we're going to mine the moon. And so to me, the title of all these iPad poems, woe beside and insulting, you know, the celestial sphere. I've called the moon a celestial sphere because in ancient cultures, the silver moon was far more mysterious than the sun. Okay, the sun looks often compared to a lion. It's a great roaring furnace in the sky, and it heats us, it creates photosynthesis. It's very important to keep us warm, but it also can scorch everything and create deserts. The moon is what I call a subtle body. It's a beautiful circle, and again and again, I create this perfect circle because I've got a facility on the thing I use on my iPad where you can choose the size of circle that you dab onto something, and for me, it's the word in that it's got ebb and flow there. I think that's the red and black one, isn't it? India on the left-hand side.
Yep. Yes, it is.
That's red and black. Well, of course, we know that the moon controls the tides all over the world. And of course, it controls fertility because of the menstrual flow of women. And so that one, ebb and flow, and why it's got the red writing, it symbolizes the ebb and flow of, well, the natural way that many, many women around the world still experience their fertility cycle. Then this is the last one I've done. I've got so angry at the idea that the moon is just going to be a colony of our planet, and we're going to raid it and leave all mess and muck up there. Moon dump. And that's a very furious poem. We are dumping stuff on the moon, and the title of that is Dumb Moon. But we'll see, won't we? How dumb, how stupid is the moon? If we start drilling a lot on the moon, and somebody has said, oh, we've got to drill very, very deep because I want to find some scientific thing out, how do we know what we're going to upset? If we do not respect nature, nature will not respect us. I'm getting on my high horse now. Right, so we've got to our last piece. How's our time? Oh, we're doing quite well, aren't we? I mean, we're just gone 4:15. I am devoted to the ginkgo tree, and I'm going to hold you a lovely little dry ginkgo tree up. Can we? Leaf. Such an extraordinary shape. I always remember first seeing a ginkgo tree, and that was because my father, when, I came back from Athens in 1968 and settled down in Oxford until I got married in 1971. And my father loved walking around college gardens. And he one day, Wadham College Fellows Garden was open. Well, of course, that's a very exclusive place where only the fellows can walk. Normally, the general public are allowed into Oxford Gardens. They're very beautiful, between maybe, say, 2 and 4 or 2 and 5. Most days, it depends if they've got special functions and they close them. But on the whole, tourists love walking around Oxford Gardens, but not Fellows Gardens. They were only open, I think, maybe for charity, maybe the Gardens Open scheme, that charity. And so the ginkgo, the garden was open. And I remember my father saying, oh, look, Paula, that's a ginkgo tree. My father was very interested in nature, and he had all these different books about trees. And so I'd never seen it. And I remember what I said. I said, oh, what a funny looking tree. And what a strange leaf. So simple, because it isn't like any other tree leaf, is it? It's got this bilobe shape. And I got very interested again in the ginkgo because when I'd been to Toronto to perform in a festival in 1984, I decided I'd go to the Art Gallery of Ontario. And that is the short form of that is AGO. If you say I'm going to AGO, Toronto people know what you're talking about. And when I came out of the gallery, I saw rows and rows of ginkgo trees. Well, at that time, we in Britain, we didn't plant rows in the cities to purify the air, which they do. I mean, we're doing it now. In Oxford, up in Summertown, there are magnificent ginkgos. They planted them maybe 10 years ago, and they look absolutely wonderful recently, I'm told, because they go yellow, buttercup yellow, before they drop all their leaves. But they're there deliberately to try and purify the air. So I wanted to pay a tribute to the ginkgo tree. And so in my own small publication, I did these photographs of the 21 leaves that I'd actually brought from Toronto, those leaves I saw, and dried them and then put them in this publication of mine. It's a pale green page printed with photocopies of the ginkgos. So that was my first official publication. Right. Well, that photograph on the left-hand side is me performing to the ginkgos with a whole variety of people that came to see my performance. And that's in Holywell Manor, which belongs to Balliol College. And at the time, they had got a configuration of ginkgo trees that I thought was unusual in Britain. They've got 3 one side and 3 the other side, and they look very beautiful. I didn't realize at the time that we also at UCL, we've got ginkgo trees in our front quad, and Liz told me about those. So I did a big project developed in the 1990s of 7 living monuments celebrating the ginkgo and the fact that it's very, very ancient, that it survived the Hiroshima bomb. And I wanted to do these grand ginkgo schemes in 7 different places in Britain. And the one that you've got there is Ginkgo Compass, and it's designed for somewhere in London and an equivalent one somewhere in Japan, because ginkgos were brought to us in Europe by a Dutch botanist, Camphor, in the 1690s. And he brought seeds and he planted them in the Botanic Garden in Leiden in Holland. And then we've got some, I think that's 1770 in Kew Gardens. So people started to get very, very interested. Ah, yes. Now, we have a project in our residents association called Gardens Open that I used to run, and now very kindly someone else is running it. But I did a project on the ginkgo tree in my garden, and quite a few residents would come along and perform it with me. And all those illustrations that you see on the right-hand side, they're the 7 ginkgo projects that I've designed for all the different nations of the UK. That one on the left-hand side is designed for a border. It's called Ginkgo Peace, and it's a border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. And that's a sacred grove, only to be entered by children, but you only can see it from a distance. It's a very special meaning, and only children can go. And they hang wind harps on the trees. And it was the idea that it would be online permanently for people to view all over the world and hear the wind harps blowing, but no actual admittance to grown-ups of that. So it keeps it as a sacred grove, but on the other hand, anybody could see it from all over the world on the internet.
Should we have
Right.
the yeah, should we
Now,
have the
this
chart?
is the last one. Have you got a gong, India?
I got one, but it didn't end up actually being very good, so I'm not going to gong it because it's, well, we'll just do the chant, I think, if that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I bought a gong for this poem, but it's not a very good one. So unfortunately, we won't. I don't think we should use it. I'm afraid, but
Oh,
I
right.
think we can do the charm.
We'll imagine a gong because ginkgos traditionally were planted round Buddhist temples in Japan. And the gong is a very sacred sound, an instrument in Japan. And it's not a dinner gong that you might get in some restaurants or hotels. It's a very solemn and lovely sound. So has everybody got a ginkgo leaf?
Yes, I can give them out.
Good.
We need to talk to him.
Thank you. Okay, Paula, we all have our leaves. Can you
Oh,
see me?
lovely. Right. Well, this is a big chant that I'm going to do, and I hope that you will do it with me because the ginkgo is a very, very ancient tree, millions of years old. And what is so extraordinary is that there were ginkgos in Hiroshima when the bomb fell. And now they've created a peace park there. And some of those ginkgos every year are honored by Shinto priests. Shinto is a nature religion in Japan. And the Shinto believe that all nature is sacred, and they reverence this tree and they go and do a ritual and ceremonial prayers because it symbolizes peace. And I have read that there are a group of people in Japan called Mayors of Peace. That's Mayors. And they have taken seeds from that ginkgo that survived and they've grown them into tiny little saplings and they have produced seeds and they've given these seeds all around the world to various places to plant these seeds as a symbol of peace. And we have actually, I saw it in the newspaper fairly recently, we have been given seeds at our botanic garden. Ours is the oldest in Britain, it's 1632. And we've got some, and I hope that Cambridge will ask for some because I'm sure they're very happy for them. I know Glasgow's been given some, maybe Edinburgh, but all over the world, the ginkgo is now seen as a symbol of peace. And so when we chant this, we will say the words, and I'm just going to say the words first before I chant it. So a concrete poem is created from the word itself, and then you add a little other, one or two more letters, and it extends its meaning, and then again and again. So this one says ginkgo, and then from the O, oxy, and then the trees give off oxygen and they take in carbon dioxide. That's the photosynthesis, and then ginkgo oxygenesis. So there's the idea that oxygen is going to create new generations, and then ginkgo oxygenesis B. So let all this survive. Ginkgo oxygenesis begin. So purify our world, purify our world. Ginkgo oxygenesis be ginkgo, ginkgo, ginkgo. Dear old Bob, he'd roar this one out. It was absolutely lovely. Let's have a little go at it. And maybe some other time, walking around the streets with ginkgo leaves, you might get a few students come along and in Cambridge, sing to the ginkgo. Because who knows? The ginkgo might be able to hear us. We don't know really what nature can do. But many people believe that all trees, all things have spirits and are alert to how we feel. So let's end our meeting today with a ginkgo. poem. And a chant, it's a big chant. I did this in memory of Professor Eric Mottram at King's College after he died. And I think there's a video of that in his archive, Professor Eric Mottram.
Should we just finish up now, Paula?
Ginkgo, 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 oxy, ginkgo, oxygen, ginkgo, oxygenesis, ginkgo, oxygenesis, ginkgo, oxygenesis, begin. Ginkgo, oxygenesis, ginkgo, 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 ginkgo.
Wonderful. All right. All right. Thanks so much, Paula.
Great.
Might end things now and let people go home. But just as a final word, thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate it, and it's been a wonderful event the whole day. And have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.